Good evening. Hope you've had a good week. Looks like our nation is opening up a little more. We here at Olive Ranch are still going to move cautiously. And once again, we're uploading our message for Wednesday night. Just a brief challenge for you tonight. I hope that you'll give it some thought. I've not meant to be a cheerleader all these last 2 months, but I do want you to understand that I have seen my role, or I see my responsibility is to keep you encouraged, to keep you considering that God is at work, not forgetting that He's working, He's doing something through this, and it may not be to our liking. We may not ever understand, but I feel like we must continue to keep our eyes focused on Him. Let me read you our text. It's found in Romans 11. Romans 11. I'm going to read verses 33 through 36. I've entitled this brief little message here, Who But God? Who But God? And I think you'll understand that at the end. Oh, the depths of the riches and wisdom and knowledge of God. Oh, the depths of the riches and wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are His judgments, how inscrutable His ways. For who has known the mind of the Lord? And who has been His counselor? Or who has given a gift to Him that He might be repaid? For from Him and through Him and to Him are all things, and to Him be glory forever. Amen. This is a text where the Apostle Paul is writing about how God has done a work in the lives of both Israel and the Gentiles. And let me just take a few moments to explain what he's been discussing in the previous chapters. He's wanted to make very certain that the reader understands that God shows mercy and grace. He never shows favor as in something earned. It's always His mercy or His grace. He's not obligated to do anything. And the apostle it's kind of a parenthetical statement where he's in awe. He's stopping to just consider exactly how God has worked. How has He worked? Well, let's take a look at what he's been going over. He's discussed Israel, their history. We all know the history of Israel. We've heard it in every Sunday school class we've ever attended. We know Abraham and the patriarchs, and we know the prophets, and we know the covenants, the promises that God made. We know all the times that they were delivered and cared for and provided. And now, the Apostle Paul says, Israel was set aside. They had been moved aside so that God could continue a work in the lives of the Gentiles. Well, I want to tell you that Israel had rebelled. They had rejected. They've done it a number of times. In fact, they still do, not receiving Jesus as the Messiah. But the Apostle Paul says this was to fulfill a purpose. It was to complete a work that God was doing. Let me tell you a story about a fellow in our church. Years ago, a man in our church, I've told the story a few times, and I'm always in awe of how God works. Here's how the story goes. A man in our church, good fella, nice guy, friend of mine, he tripped over a cat coming down the stairwell of his home. Well, that's pretty bad right there. First of all, he owns a cat. Secondly, somebody let that cat in the house. It's bad enough that he owns a cat. It's bad enough that he tripped over the cat. But he broke his ankle. He fell to the bottom of the steps and broke an ankle. Pretty bad, huh? It gets worse. It was during cold and flu season. He goes to the orthopedic. He's sitting amongst other patients who are apparently sniffling and sick with some cold, and he thinks he picks up a little cold while he's there. Pretty bad, huh? You trip, you fall, you break an ankle, you end up going to the doctor where you get sick. It gets worse. Well, his cold goes into pneumonia. Pretty bad, huh? It gets worse. He has to go back into the office for some follow-up. And during the follow-up, he has to have a lung x-ray. And here's where it gets better. You see, that lung x-ray revealed a spot. And you say, well, Tim, how could that be good? Because they removed a lobe from his lung. And now, 10 years later, they're still grateful for that cat. They have not identified that spot, known anything about it, had he not gotten sick because he went to the doctor, because he injured his ankle, because he fell over a cat. Seems strange the way God works. I remember hearing a story of Cleve McClary. I've shared this before with our folks, and I'll share it again. A fellow who served in the war, in Vietnam. He was injured, lost an eye, several surgeries, lost arms, legs, several surgeries later. It's during one of the surgeries that they're trying to do some repair work for something that's going on behind one of his eyes, and they find a tumor in his brain. And I remember I was sitting at the Duke Youth Day during a football game, and he was the guest speaker, and his words said, here's what he said, he said, you know, if it hadn't been for those surgeries, which came as a result of my injuries, which were a result of me serving our nation, that tumor would probably not have been located until it was too late. And I thought, what a positive outlook. And he acknowledged God and how he was working. Well, I say the same for this fellow in our church who fell and broke an ankle. It doesn't change the fact that he owned a cat, but the Lord used that cat. Well, folks, Paul's doing the same thing here. And in chapter 11, he's saying God's done a work. It's kind of strange how he's done it. He's acknowledging that to the Gentiles that you have received mercy. You've been invited, who, as he describes it in Ephesians chapter 2, you who were once aliens, and he described it as being outside of the household of faith, aliens, strangers to the promises and the covenants of God. He says, you Gentiles, you have now been given an opportunity to experience the same grace and mercy that Israel had. Well, they rebelled, they sinned. God set them aside so that he might extend his mercy and his grace to you. It's a simple story, simple illustration. But Israel rebelled. They still reject. But they still remain God's chosen. And they will at one day in the future, return back to him and receive more blessings in spite of their disobedience. Now, lest we Gentiles think we're better or more deserving, he says in chapter 11 these words here. He says, so why did Israel stumble? Did they stumble so that they might fall? He says, by no means. Rather, it was through their trespass that salvation has come to the Gentiles, so as to make Israel jealous. Now, if their trespass means riches for the world, and if their failure means riches for the Gentiles, how much more will their full inclusion mean? Here's what he said. He said, God used their failure to bring mercy to the Gentiles. And as a result of the favor that was shown, Israel, it will serve to prompt or stir Israel's heart to return back to him. And he says, think about it. If we have received such a blessing through their failure, how much more will Israel be blessed when they turn back to God? Lest we consider God's hand absent at this time of year, lest we think that there's something that he's been absent, that he's been unaware or insensitive or uncaring, that this has happened while he was asleep. Let me read you what Paul says in verses 28 through 32 of chapter 11. He says, as regards the gospel, they are enemies for your sake, but as regards the election, they are beloved for the sake of your forefathers. For the gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable. For just as you were at one time disobedient to God, but now have received mercy because of their disobedience. Again, lest the Gentiles think themselves more deserving. He reminds them. He said, hey, you too were disobedient. You too were outside of that relationship with God. And then he goes on, he says, so that God has consigned to all disobedience so that he might show mercy on all. God allowed Israel to reject. God reached out and redeemed each of us, extending his mercy so that he might show that mercy because of his great love for us. A plan that could have only been conceived in the mind of God. How the world, the entire world, could come to know him through faith because of the error, the failure of his chosen people. So I repeat that verse again. Oh, the depths of the riches and wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his ways, and how are his judgments, and how inscrutable are his ways. His ways are higher than ours. His thoughts are higher than ours. We're reminded that he is sovereign. We may not understand or agree, but we must trust because of his love and his unsearchable wisdom as he fulfills his purpose in our world today.